I think we are conditioned by sort of market forces when it comes to
Hmm.
our homes.
Yes, very much.
We're being told what to buy. And design is so important and it can absolutely tangibly improve our lives. But I don't know that there's enough of a conversation around what what that looks like and what that
Hmm.
requires of us. It's just a lot of consumption all the time, a lot of money being spent on so many things without really thinking about what that offers us in our spaces.
This is Lived In, a podcast by Hemby Home Company in association with Haystack Realty Group in Greenville, North Carolina. Lived In exists to host thought-provoking discussions on design and real estate, empowering everyday home dwellers to live beautifully regardless of budget or circumstance. Every 2 weeks, join me, your host Femi Koz, a realtor, design advisor and content manager, as we cover everything from how to effectively conduct a home search to which rooms are worth the investment in your home. Together, let's find out what it really takes to live beautifully. This season, we're hosting interviews with experts, putting the keys in your hand as you make some of the most important decisions that come with creating a beautiful place to live. In our previous episode, you heard me connect with Lee Baker from Carolina Farmhouse Furniture in Greenville, North Carolina. This week, we're continuing with Healthful Home conversation through a slightly different lens, as I talk with DeeDee Birch of Make Good Places, examining the impact our built environments have on our spaces and explaining why we often need to look beyond the general market to cultivate a way of life that actually makes us better. Let's get into it.
So, DeeDee, you have 6 letters following your name. You have MDS and LFA. Can you explain for our listeners what those mean and what it is that they allow you to do?
Yes, absolutely. The MDS is a Master's of Design Studies from the Boston Architectural College. I have a focus in sustainable design. So that was a graduate degree that looked at sustainability of the built environment sort of across scales. So interdisciplinary groups of architects, interior designers, engineers coming together and studying what it means for the built environment to really be sustainable. And then the LFA is from an organization called the ILFI, and that is a building certification, or I shouldn't say building because they also work across scales, but a professional certification from an organization creating regenerative buildings and a regenerative built environment. So it's similar to like a LEED certification in building certification, really.
And what
Um,
on earth is a regenerative building?
So I think there's this movement in sustainability where we're moving from sort of efficiency, doing less bad, to actively doing good with how we design and build our spaces. And that's sort of
Yeah.
what regenerative buildings are, is they're going to actively contribute to um, the local ecosystem and human health and sort of do good instead of just doing less bad.
Okay. How on earth did you end up doing focusing in this area? So, yeah, buildings and design studies, and then biophilic design kind of specifically after that.
Yeah. My focus right now is interiors. I'm not an architect. My background is in English and sculpture, actually. So I got my undergrad in art and English.
I love
Um,
that.
there were some really amazing artists that were inspiring me to look at sort of the land art movement, artists using sort of natural materials and talking about our relationship with the natural world, especially as we're sort of urbanizing. And so those kinds of works planted the seeds for the master's degree. And then after undergrad, I started working at a residential interior design firm. And so it was kind of those things woven together where, I became aware of the lack of sustainability of our built environment, the climate crisis, our consumption, but also the potential of really sustainable human health focused design.
What was it like graduating from your undergrad degree and then working in the residential interior design firm? What were kind
Yeah,
of things that you noticed when you started working there?
yeah, I think anyone who studies English and art, the arts in general in undergrad, and then suddenly has to make a living, it's sort of like a jarring right turn. And I knew I wanted to be in a creative space of some kind. I think we are conditioned by sort of market forces when it comes to
Mhm.
our homes. We're
Yes, very much.
Yeah, we're being told what to buy, and design is so important, and it can absolutely tangibly improve our lives, but I don't know that there's enough of a conversation around what that looks like and what that
Hmm.
requires of us. So it's just a lot of consumption all the time, a lot of money being spent on so many things without really thinking about what that offers us in our spaces.
Yes. Yeah, that I'm 100%. I have a conversation in this series actually talking with an architect, and he is talking about, I think, the things that we focused on in time as time has gone on when it comes to architecture in the houses that we live in, and how we're accepting a lot less, we're tolerating a lot less or we're compromising when really the opportunities that we have when it comes to creating our built environment in terms of our homes are so much bigger and so much wider. So I love that. So then
Yes.
how did you, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say that's so well put. That's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely.
Um, he's great. He's based in Durham, North Carolina. Well, he has offices in Durham, North Carolina. That was a really fascinating conversation, just like this one. So then how did you kind of go from working in the residential firm to, I guess, exploring more in terms of sustainable design and biophilic design?
Yeah, so I still work in residential design. It's I so part of my thesis work and my graduate degree was delving into biophilic design because I think it's this really interesting space where we have mutually beneficial solutions. So the environment and the climate is benefiting as much as people are from these biophilic design interventions. And so my thesis was all about how do we bring healthier design, primarily biophilic design, to our everyday spaces. Like there's some really amazing, innovative, sustainable architecture, regenerative architecture, biophilic
Mm-hmm.
design, but it's not happening in the places that we're all inhabiting. For most of us, we're
Yes.
not seeing it in our homes, in our downtowns, in our schools. Um, and so it was looking at how do we sort of scale this so that it's accessible to lots of people and everyone can benefit from it.
So what was the conclusion?
I think I mean there's a lot of factors. I think barriers to information. People don't know biophilic design. They don't know that there are design theories that can really change the quality of their lives. And so part of
Yes.
it is getting people out there talking about it and implementing it.
Yep.
I think part of it is changing our culture of consumption. Um, the things we're being sold right now are not necessarily the things that benefit us.
Yes.
And so some the industry is in desperate need of some voices sort of offering a more critical perspective on what people need and how we should be designing our homes and what benefits us.
So how would you describe biophilic design for the person who doesn't have a clue, never heard of it before,
Sure.
doesn't even know where to begin?
So biophilic design is based on, I'm going to start a little bit with the science. It's based on the
Yes.
biophilia hypothesis, which was popularized by this scientist, E.O. Wilson.
Okay.
He only passed in the last few years. And basically what the biophilia hypothesis said was because we evolved in natural environments, because human beings historically were always outside in nature, we've evolved this need to affiliate with and care for and be part of natural environments.
Mm,
And so what that means in today's contemporary culture is one that we don't really have that. And we have a severely degraded human nature connection. And so biophilic design is about strengthening that connection and connecting our places to their local context, their environments, the topography, the climate, um, and sort of heightening our awareness and connection with all of the natural elements because it benefits us and it benefits the environment.
yeah. It's funny because I think your Instagram page kind of just popped up on my feed. And immediately I was like, yes, there's something about it that immediately resonated. And I think even though most people are not familiar with biophilic design and what it is as a concept, everybody knows, everybody experiences the same kind of inner exhalation when they look out of a window and they can see trees all around, or when they can view the water. And I don't know enough to say that that's part of it, but I know that there is something about being human and being in nature and recognizing and having that tangible connection with it that is good for us. So I love that this is what your work is focused on.
Yeah,
What?
oh,
Oh, go
sorry.
ahead.
It's funny that you
No.
say that, because I think we're already sort of seeing, like, we innately sort of place value on things that are biophilic. You see that,
Yes.
people pay a premium to live near the water. People, that whole like location, location,
Yes.
location mantra. So I think we subconsciously know and gravitate towards nature. It's
Yeah.
just about articulating it and being really intentional with it and acknowledging that companies and market forces aren't necessarily thinking about this at all. But everyone, you're right, everyone does feel that, and there is an innate connection, and we naturally value that. We see that in real estate and the way people design, sort of
Yes.
innate. It's about harnessing it.
It's funny too, because I think, and I mean, this is probably going on the last 15, 20 years that I've noticed it. And I'm fairly young, so I'm sure it's been going on for longer than that. But even when it comes to urban design, there's been a greater integration of green spaces and outdoor spaces in urban design. So when people are designing, wow, words are hard. When people are designing, cities or places where it's going to be a multi-story. I remember years ago seeing a multi-story apartment building, but there was a integrated space for each person to have a green area. And so I'm curious if you've noticed any trends in terms of, and I know you do the interior side more than the architecture side, but if you've noticed any trends over time of that becoming something that is happening, maybe in other places, maybe it's Abu Dhabi or Dubai versus America, but I'm wondering if you're seeing that anywhere.
Yes, I think the biggest thing is, well, certainly cities are reflections of their sort of political and geographic context. So, what's happening in the US is maybe a ways behind what's happening in Europe or Abu Dhabi or wherever. I think um yeah, I think I was just in Europe, so it's interesting, like
Mm,
something like Europe has such history, and vernacular architecture can be really
yes.
wonderful examples of biophilic design, sort of
Mm,
before the rise of
yes.
all of our mechanized systems and all of our plugs and everything. People were designing with local materials,
Yes.
based around where the sun was, based around climate and seasonality. And you can still see that, in Greece, they have cave homes still,
Yes.
and certainly cities are finding ways of marrying the 21st century and our age of information and technology with sort of a legacy of vernacular and traditional building that we're losing. And
Yes.
that vernacular architecture in terms of climate and performance is far ahead of what we're building now. Um,
Hmm.
I think climate also plays a role. Cities who have to address it first are addressing
Yes.
it first. Places that are hot are having to really look at their greenery and figure out that urban heat island effect. Um, and and in the US, I think there's hope. I think there's a long way to go. And the biggest thing I will say is that it has to be equally distributed. That's where we start to get
Yes.
conversations around like environmental racism, and
Hmm.
communities that are sort of systemically disenfranchised and
Yes.
under-resourced, and making sure biophilic design across scales, whether that's the urban scale and planning or down to individual single family units, like it
Hmm.
we need to make sure that biophilic design is getting to everyone, especially because climate change causes changes in human behavior. People in heat, not only is it a risk of dying, but it's, higher rates of conflict and crime. And so, yeah, thinking about biophilic design as a tool to mitigate all of these layers of the climate crisis.
Yeah, it's funny to say. a better environment. A better environment makes our societies better. But I think it's a true statement. It feels like a giant leap. And it's funny that you use the phrase environmental racism. I have never heard the phrase used before, but the moment you said it, I knew exactly what you meant. So it is interesting that I think, in terms of the layers of how people are affected, something I've struggled with, and I think it's grown worse in other countries too. So I've lived in the States since 2017, so 7 years now. And something that initially was such a big problem for me was the fact that it feels like when you're in America, the disparity when it comes to wealth is so, it feels so massive. It feels like there's a giant chasm between the haves and the have-nots. And I mean, in recent years, it feels like the middle class has basically been eliminated, and that's gotten a lot worse. But I felt like in England and when I lived in Sweden, people who worked at McDonald's still had money and they could buy an apartment and they could travel. And that's not a thing here. So I think too, understanding the lack of exposure for, I guess, people who would be considered lower middle class or, lower than that, they are going to have even less exposure to biophilic design than the people at the very top. And that's something that frustrates me because I would love equity amongst everybody, that everybody kind of gets the same opportunity. So I love the idea that hopefully as time goes on, more and more people will get access to that. So I love that.
I agree with you. I was just gonna say that's what I appreciate about your work is that we treat design as a luxury and ultimately it's not. We have to figure out how to democratize good design. And I think it's wonderful that biophilic design is something the individual can control to some extent. You can't rebuild your own city, but you can start small and there is sort of tangible health impacts to get from those strategies. So
yes.
Lived In is brought to you by Haystack Realty Group and Hemby Home Company. When it comes to selling your home, timing is everything. You need to work with somebody who understands your local market, understands housing sale trends, and knows how to leverage pricing and timing to great effect. If you're thinking about buying property and want some help, or if you'd like to know how much your land or property is worth, click the links in our show notes or go to www.haystackre.com. That's www.haystackre.com.
So what are some examples of biophilic design that people may recognize or know or have seen?
So I think we see patterns. So there are two major frameworks for biophilic design. There's a guy, Stephen Kellert, who was a scholar and he created a framework for biophilic design. And then there's a group called Terrapin Bright Green, and they created the 14 patterns of biophilic design.
Wow.
And it's amazing because basically what they did was created a roadmap for what a biophilic place looks like. And a lot of it is stuff that we can take for granted until we don't have it. So use outside, operable windows, fresh air, plentiful natural daylight, presence of water. So whether and that can be anything from like you have an aquarium in your house to, you're overlooking the ocean. And so there's scales to all of this. They talk a lot about material connections to nature. So what kinds of materials are you around? Does it reflect sort of the local materials of your climate and your place? And using all of these patterns to create, a place that is deeply rooted culturally and sort of geographically, physically in your place, wherever you're located. In terms of famous buildings with biophilic design, that's a little bit trickier because especially in the States, it's going to be like corporate campuses that have these cutting edge technologies and strategies. So I think it's more people see elements of biophilic design in the world without even really realizing it. Window seats, like if you see like a bay window with the windows, that's a big one. Especially in residential contexts, there are a few strategies that sort of lend themselves to this scale. Prospect and refuge is a big one. so many people can do, but in evolution, we sort of evolved to gravitate towards places with protection overhead and behind us with views outward.
Yeah.
Because historically that would mean safety for us, an
Hmm.
awareness of what's coming. And so recreating those spaces on smaller scales in contemporary context can be super restorative for us.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, I think people are seeing moments of biophilic design lots of places. It's just about being purposeful about what they do and how to design it into their lives.
Yep. So I have two questions. One of them is, what's the place that you live in like, and how did you choose to live where you're living, and what kind of have you done to enhance or emphasize biophilic design in that space?
So I've lived lots of places. I bounced around quite a bit after undergrad. We moved like 5 times in 4 years or something
Oh
like
my
that. So
gosh.
apartment after apartment after apartment. We're now back in Connecticut. So I think we're in an apartment that's sort of we have an open floor plan situation,
Hmm.
which has its own design challenges. And it's also sort of a basement unit. So we have a
Mm.
ground level door, but limited natural light in lots of places.
Yes.
Um, so in one sense, we preserve. We kept like the exposed brick out, embraced whatever windows we had. I'm in the Northeast, so we used green, healthy paint. I always encourage people to go for like a mineral paint
Hmm.
over a traditional Ben Moore or whatever. So we have dark green interior paint on some of our trim, and that sort of reflects the outdoors.
Yes.
And our forest, we're in a pretty woodsy area now. And I have lots of plants sort of scattered throughout the space. We really try to maximize our natural light. So because we have
Hmm.
this one door that's like at ground level, we keep it open a lot. You can hear the birds. Some of these biophilic design things can be almost behavioral or
Yes.
habit instead of like a product you buy. So
Yes.
we really try to maximize open windows and doors for fresh air, to hear, wildlife outside, especially, when it rains, listening to it rain. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, we have some vintage goods that are, something that can be really helpful for folks when trying to create a space that maybe isn't naturally connected to their environment or not
Yes.
on an architectural level designed to connect to the environment. Things like botanical motifs,
Mm.
excuse me. So like anything with patterns that resemble flora and fauna and leaves. And so we have some vintage rugs that sort of bring that in. Um, yeah, we have some artwork that will be, we have like these plants cast in resin that we have hanging.
Yes. Very cool.
Yeah. So we're doing what we can with what we've got.
Yes. But that's what I love, and I'm sure that that's what you do when you're helping others too. I think there can be, it's easy to kind of say, well, like, this is the house I have, and there's not much I can do with it. I don't have money to knock it down and start over, which probably would not be necessarily helpful anyway.
Yes.
But I think that there are these small things. And it's funny you talking about keeping that one door open where you get loads of natural light, because I never recognized it. I think I've just always lived in homes that are bright and have sunlight streaming in. And when my husband and I got married, he would send me houses that he liked, and it would be like this dark, cavernous looking space with
Yeah.
no natural light. There's one small window in a corner, and no, and I was like, I can't imagine living that way, because I don't know, I just need light. I need all of the natural light I can possibly get. To the point now where we have kids, and my youngest has an obsession with switching lights on, and I tell him to stop. Why? It's dark. No, buddy, it's not dark. I've got the light from the sun coming in through the window. That's enough. So, but I so appreciate it's as simple sometimes as keeping a door open or bringing more natural motifs into the home. I love that, and I think that makes it really accessible.
Yes, the natural light is a huge one. Like the way you were talking about it, we tend to overlight our spaces these days. We have can
Mm,
lights everywhere. We have all the fluorescents, the really jarring blue lights.
yes.
And that can be good, when we're trying to be productive. So light has a huge role in regulating our circadian rhythms, which, sort of dictate, it's more than just sleep. It's our mood and our appetite and all of these sort of systems in our bodies. And so,
Hmm.
um, I will say with the exception of when you're trying to be productive, which is when blue light can be really helpful,
Yes.
and bright natural light. The rest of our time, especially in our homes, it's we overlight our spaces. And so relying on natural light whenever you have it is
Hmm.
in fact a very biophilic intervention. It's a way of, because it heightens your awareness of the sun moving through the sky and of time passing, and it connects us to nature in a way that we kind of take for granted, especially when we have all these artificial light. So I love that that's what you're talking about with your kids and what you're doing day in and day out, because it's a little thing that can be so helpful for us.
Yes. Yes. And I actually wanted to ask you, and I think you kind of touched on it already, but what are some of the ways not incorporating biophilic design can have a negative impact on us?
Yeah, I think you said this earlier in the beginning too, is we've gotten used to asking for a lot less. And so there's multiple layers sort of to how our spaces impact us. Our physical environment is always going to impact us for better or for worse.
Yeah.
It's part of how our cognition works, sort of biophilic design starts to get into like sort of the neural mechanisms of design and how we think and move through the world. So our environments are always impacting us, for good or for bad. And I think
Hmm.
with poor design, on some level, there's sort of like physical health impacts, like toxic chemicals and synthetic materials can contribute to a whole host of health issues. We're talking chronic things like asthma or autoimmune
Yeah.
conditions, to more acute stuff, cancers and obesity, and there's all kinds of impacts of materials on our health.
Yes.
And there are resources like sixclasses.org is a great one to look at like
Okay.
major classes of chemicals, and it's great in delineating sort of the outcomes of some of these materials. And then on sort of a more psychological level, poor design, sort of disconnection from nature, under designed spaces that are boring or poorly
Hmm.
lit, or they can have they impact our mood and our sleep, our they can increase stress and exacerbate anxiety. um and there's a famous gallbladder study where they tracked um, patients who had gallbladder surgery. They tracked their healing based on views. So one group
Oh,
had views
wow.
outside the window, one had no view at all, and one was looking at abstract art. Those were the three groups. And the people who had views outside looking at greenery actually healed faster and more comfortably than
Mm,
those who did not have that view. So I think we take for granted sort of the multiplicity of health impacts that come from being
yes.
poorly designed spaces.
Are materials, or I guess how much are materials a factor when it comes to biophilic design? In my head, using natural materials is going to be a part of it, but how much is that a factor?
I think it's one pattern among many.
Hmm.
So I think natural materials, I shouldn't not all natural materials, like some things are found naturally in nature are still poisonous. So with the
Yes.
disclaimer that, like formaldehyde you find in nature, but it's bad for us. So I don't want to say blanket statement, everything in nature is good. But I think natural materials, generally speaking, have the benefit of they're generally healthier for us. So when we look at microplastics,
Hmm.
um, a lot of that is perpetuated by synthetic materials. And so not only can natural
Mm,
materials sort of connect us to where we are in the world when we're using local natural materials, or materials that age, sort of that patina over time can be really biophilic, but they also sort of minimize the potential for health impacts that we
that
get
makes
from
sense.
the materials that we're sort of spending all of our days around.
Yes. it almost is like your body gets a break when it's around the helpful local natural materials versus all the other stuff that is currently floating around or constantly floating around in your life.
Yes, and they can help air quality, and indoor air quality is another thing that's tricky, and it's often sort of not great. You know, indoor air can be 2 to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air. And so like the things we're putting in our homes have really, it's more than ventilation is great, air purifiers are great, but also we have to look at what's contributing to that poor air quality in our homes, and materials certainly play a role in that. So, you know, I always, and people sort of, there are lots of precedent of, you know, Scandinavian design, you see lots of wood.
Yes.
You know, if you go to the Southwest here, you get adobe. So
Yes.
there are lots of examples that we can kind of look to figure out like what material palette makes sense for where you are and what you need.
Do you know, and if you don't, that's okay, do you know which materials do help enhance air quality in the house? Asking as an asthma sufferer.
It's so I think it's more about like what you, my wife is the same way. She has terrible asthma. I think it's one of those things where omission is really powerful. So
Mm,
you know, like something like a rug or carpet, wall-to-wall carpeting, or those things that trap dust, synthetic
yes.
trap, you know. So those things can be counterproductive for somebody with asthma. And then especially with breathing and allergies and asthma, it's some of the little stuff that we don't even think about. So like
Mm-hmm.
adhesives, glues, um, I know there's like special lines of sort of no VOC, low VOC.
Yes.
These are the things to be looking for when you like, we don't think about sort of all of the like nuts and bolts of what goes into every
Mm-hmm.
product. And so thinking small, like the glues, the adhesives, all of the like liquids, the cleaners that we're using in our home.
Yeah.
And there's a part of the LFA that I have that talks about, you know, your space is only as sustainable as the way you maintain it. And so
Mm,
green cleaners are like a really easy, high impact thing for people, asthma, young kids,
yeah.
developing, like all those things. It's it's really great to be using gentle cleaners, non-toxic cleaners,
Mm-hmm.
and minimizing the impact of that because that will impact your air quite a bit.
Yeah. That makes sense. Thank you.
And also, I
Uh,
will say wood is a big one in terms of materials, health
yes.
materials. There's been lots of work and studies done on wood specifically, not necessarily related to the indoor air quality question, but wood has a very biophilic effect, very
Mm,
restorative effect. And so if you're looking for natural materials, and there's wood is native to lots of places, so that is
yes.
a great local material to look to when it comes to implementing biophilic design.
That makes sense. I was going to ask you if plants are also helpful when it comes to biophilic design. Is it necessary to have house plants? Is it helpful to have house plants? Does it not really matter? I'm curious.
Yeah, absolutely. It does. I think plants are like one of the biggest facets of biophilic design that sort of captured popular imagination, which is great.
Mm.
I think if you're a person who hates plants, don't put plants in your house.
Yes.
But generally speaking, yes, I think you know, visual connections with nature is huge for us. And so
Mm-hmm.
to have growing things, green things, it heightens our awareness of sort of cycles of growth and decay and regrowth.
Yeah.
That could be really beneficial for us. I will say that um, biophilic design is great when it's done with multiple patterns sort of implemented together. So
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe people are under the impression that one potted plant in the corner is going to change their lives.
Yes.
And ultimately, unfortunately, we need like a little bit more than that. I think it's really beneficial to think about sort of multiple strategies sort of combined, complementary
Mm-hmm.
strategies combined. So if you have your cozy corner and you're looking out your window and you feel like you have some protection behind you and overhead, and you have your potted plant, or you have you know, a candle with an outdoor, or a diffuser with like an outdoorsy foresty scent,
Yes.
or you know, like it's about combining multiple strategies
Mm-hmm.
together. So greenery is phenomenal. super low cost intervention that I'm a huge
Yes.
fan of, but also thinking about how it can combine with other biophilic design strategies to
Yes.
sort of heighten the impact of what you're doing.
That makes sense. And that's a good answer.
Thank you.
Okay, so how can people implement this? And I'll make this kind of, I think maybe my last question. We'll see. How can people implement this if they are in a new build home? And how can people implement this in an older home? Just making it achievable and doable.
Yeah, so I think challenges and benefits in both situations. Older homes, before sort of the like mass standardization of homes and housing, people had to build sort of more in tune with nature, and they had
Yeah.
to build to maximize solar gains and because of that, and they use natural materials because that's what was on the market. So in older homes, I would say preserve, preserve, preserve. Whatever you have that's there, all those quirky things that come with your house and your house alone, keep it, retain it. The natural wood floors, the windows, any kind of ornament, information richness can be really powerful for us. There's a pattern called order and complexity in biophilic design. So, and that just means our brains, we get bored easy and we love
Yes.
detail, we love ornament, which is not to say, you know, individual taste, it varies absolutely, but our brains get a lot out of information richness. So older homes especially tend to have more pattern, more ornament, moldings, keep all of that.
Yes.
Work with what you already have. If you have a gorgeous bay window, that could be a great place for refuge, for prospect refuge, implementing that. And then in newer homes, you kind of have a blank slate. I think, you know, sometimes the homes we're building today aren't designed to be connected to nature, so you don't have sort of that inherent siting or architectural sort of predisposition to be connected to nature. But
Yes.
on the other hand, it's a blank slate. So it could be a great opportunity to look outside your window and choose healthy paints that reflect sort of the nature around you. It could be a great opportunity to bring in natural materials if you're choosing finishes and flooring, thinking about stone, wood, different kinds of tile. In both situations, I would say reclaimed materials can be great. Architectural
Yes.
salvage is such a good resource.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's finding like door hardware with animal or botanical motifs, or you know, finding older furniture that is higher quality than what you'd buy today, and also
Yes.
sort of we love curves in biophilic design. You know, you don't
Mm-hmm.
find straight lines in nature. There's
That's
no
true.
right angles. So I'm a huge proponent of solutions that embrace curves and soft lines. Our brains to our brains that signal safety. So
Yeah.
that's also something to keep in mind, whether that's through your furniture or doorways. If you have curved doorways, keep that. Like, don't feel the need to make everything a right angle.
Yes. I love that. Well, okay, this has been very, very insightful. And I want to make sure that when people are listening to this, they can get in touch with you easily. What's the best way to do that?
So I have a new website, makegoodplaces.com. It's a tool for people trying to make their homes happier and healthier for people and planet. It's for anyone who's like a professional interior designer looking to make their practice greener, to the renter homeowner who's just trying to, you know, live a little bit better and lower impact.
Yes.
Reach me there. I'm on Instagram at makegoodplaces. Yeah.
That's it for this week's episode. If you enjoyed this episode and you like our show, please subscribe and leave us a review. And make sure to tune in again in 2 weeks' time for another episode of Lived In.